That night, I was driving home from a friend's house, probably around 2 or 3 in the morning. It wasn't too far, just a 20-minute drive, but the rain was coming down hard, and with no streetlights, visibility was terrible. I kept my hands tightly gripping the steering wheel, driving slowly to avoid any potential accidents. As I approached a traffic light, the road ahead seemed eerily empty. I stopped at the red light, rain hammering against the windshield, making everything blurry. Across from me, at the intersection, was a blue car, just sitting there in the middle of the road despite having a green light. Its headlights were on and the wipers were working, but the driver wasn't moving. I felt a bit uneasy, unsure if the person in the car was having trouble or just didn't notice the light. When the light turned green for me, I cautiously maneuvered around the car, sneaking a glance inside, but the rain obscured my view. Just as I continued down the road, I saw the blue car start to move again. It began following me. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but the longer it stayed on my tail, the more nervous I became. The car got closer and closer, its headlights practically blinding me in the rearview mirror. A few minutes passed and suddenly, my dashboard lit up with a low tire pressure warning. I thought it was strange timing, given the situation. I glanced back, and the blue car was still right behind me, so close it felt intentional. My stomach dropped, and my mind raced. Something was wrong. Then, another alert flashed on the dashboard: flat tire. That's when everything clicked. I was almost certain that this wasn't a coincidence. I felt the car pull to the left. My tire was completely shot. I tried to keep driving, hoping to get closer to home, but I was practically driving on the rim now. I had no choice but to pull over. To my horror, the blue car pulled over too, right behind me. I should have called for help immediately, but I was so fixated on what they were going to do that I didn't think of it. My heart was racing, and before I could react, 3 doors from the blue car flew open, and 3 men rushed out. They were on me in seconds. 2 of them ran up to my side of the car, and the third went to the passenger side. I was frozen, unable to move. One of the men, wielding a gun, screamed at me to open the door. His voice cut through the rain like a knife. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle, but just as I did, I heard the sound of glass shattering. The rear window exploded, and one of the men reached in, unlocking the back door. They yanked me out of the car and threw me to the ground, my body hitting the cold, wet pavement. I could feel the rain soaking through my clothes, but all I could focus on was the terror. My heart pounded, and my thoughts were a jumbled mess. The man with the gun pressed it to the back of my head, while the others rifled through my car, searching for anything of value. They were shouting at each other, their voices frantic. I remember thinking about how cold the pavement was, how surreal it all felt, as though my mind was trying to distance itself from what was happening. Time seemed to slow down. I lay there helplessly, listening to the rain and their angry voices as they tore apart my belongings. After what felt like an eternity, one of them shouted, "Let's go." A second later, I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head, and my face slammed into the pavement. I wasn't sure if he had hit me with the gun or just his fist, but it left me dazed. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. I heard their car doors slam shut, and the sound of tires splashing through the rain as they sped off, leaving me alone in the darkness. Slowly, I picked myself up, still in a daze, and crawled back into my car. They had taken everything, including my phone. With no other choice, I started the car and limped it home, the sound of the rims scraping against the road echoing in my ears. When I got home, I immediately called the police. After they investigated, they found small tire spikes on the road where I had first encountered the blue car. It was a deliberate trap. They had likely planned to ambush me as soon as my tire gave out. Luckily, I only hit one of the spikes, so the damage wasn't as bad as it could have been. Still, the realization that they had planned the entire thing sent chills down my spine. I was fortunate to escape with my life that night, but I'll never forget the terror I felt. The thought of what could have happened if things had gone differently still haunts me. It was supposed to be just a simple drive home, but now I always look over my shoulder, especially when I'm driving at night. One weekend, my girlfriend and I decided to head out to the mountains for some quiet, uninterrupted camping. We chose a relatively remote hiking trail, one that wasn't crowded with tourists or hikers. After a few hours on the road, we came across a small clearing in the woods and noticed something unusual. A car parked off to the side of the road with the passenger door slightly open. Rain was pouring down and the passenger seat was soaked, but there was no sign of the owner anywhere. We glanced around the woods, but there was no one to be seen. It felt strange, but we brushed it off and continued our hike. After 2 hours of trekking, we finally reached our destination, a flat, open area surrounded by towering trees. As we scanned the area for a good spot to pitch our tent, we noticed a small, solitary tent already set up in the middle of the clearing. It was clearly a one-person tent, barely large enough to fit anyone comfortably. The rain hadn't let up, so we assumed the camper was inside, seeking shelter from the weather. Figuring they wouldn't mind the company, we chose a far corner of the clearing and quickly set up our tent, preparing for the night. Later, as we sat inside, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain hitting the tent, we heard faint voices outside. At first, we thought it was the owner of the other tent talking to themselves, but the voices grew louder, coming closer. I decided to unzip the tent and take a look. To my shock, I saw two men kneeling just a few feet away from us, staring directly at our tent. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced a smile and greeted them, trying to mask my unease. They smiled back and introduced themselves, saying they had been camping in the clearing for a few days. Their clothes, though, were odd, just regular jeans and t-shirts, entirely unsuitable for several days of rough camping in the rain. They returned to their tent after a short exchange, and I quickly zipped up our tent, turning to my girlfriend. We both felt something was off. The two men didn't seem like seasoned campers, and their behavior was unsettling. We decided to leave the tent partially unzipped, so we could keep an eye on them, just in case. For the next hour, we didn't see or hear anything unusual. The rain continued to pour, and the clearing remained eerily quiet. Eventually, we decided to call it a night. As I lay there, trying to sleep, a sense of dread crept over me. Something just didn't feel right. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps. My heart raced as I peeked out of the tent, cautiously scanning the clearing. The small tent that had been in the center was now wide open, and to my horror, it was empty. The men who had claimed to be camping there were gone, as if they had never existed. I shook my girlfriend awake, whispering that we needed to leave immediately. She was groggy and confused, but the urgency in my voice made her realize something was very wrong. We quickly began packing our things, but as we hurriedly gathered our belongings, the footsteps outside grew louder, closer. I froze for a moment, my eyes fixed on the thin fabric of our tent. Through the material, I could see the shadows of the two men, standing under a nearby tree, staring at us. They didn't move or make a sound, just watched us with cold, unmoving gazes. Panic surged through me. I yanked the tent open and told my girlfriend to run. We grabbed only the essentials, leaving most of our gear behind, and sprinted down the trail as fast as we could. The rain was relentless, drenching us as we ran, but we didn't stop. I didn't dare look back. After what felt like an eternity, we finally slowed down, gasping for breath. The forest around us was silent, the only sound being the rain. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to keep moving. The fear that those men might still be following us drove us to keep running until we reached the trailhead. When we got back to the parking area, I saw that the car we had passed earlier was still there, its passenger door wide open again. My pulse quickened, and I felt a deep sense of dread wash over me. We jumped into our car and drove straight to the nearest gas station, where we called the police. A few days later, the police got back to us with information that made my blood run cold. The car we had seen belonged to an elderly man who had been reported missing. The tent in the clearing, it was his. But the two men we had encountered were nowhere to be found, and neither was the elderly man. To this day, both the men and the old man remain missing. I often think back to that night, to the cold, emotionless stares of those two men in the rain. Knowing how close we came to becoming their next victims sends shivers down my spine. Even now, the memory of their motionless figures standing in the darkness haunts me, a reminder of the danger that still lurks in those woods. It was a gloomy night as I left my friend's house, driving home alone. Rain poured down, tapping rhythmically on my windshield, turning the world outside into a blurry, distorted view. The headlights of my car barely pierced through the thick curtain of water. The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and seemingly endless. It was almost 2 a.m., and not a soul could be seen on the lonely country highway. The only sounds were the rain and the steady hum of my engine. As I passed through a stretch of dense forest, I suddenly noticed a dark shape standing in the middle of the road. Squinting through the rain, I slowed down, trying to make out what it was. As I got closer, my heart skipped a beat. There, in the middle of the road, was a man, wearing a ragged raincoat, his arms waving as if trying to flag me down. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Why would someone be out here at this hour, in the middle of nowhere? Something about the situation didn't feel right. My instinct screamed at me not to stop, so I cautiously slowed down, swerved to the side, and tried to pass him. But as I did, I couldn't help but glance at his face. His face was pale, devoid of any expression, with eyes that seemed hollow and lifeless. I felt a surge of panic, my grip tightening on the steering wheel as I sped up, desperate to leave him behind. For a few minutes, I thought I had escaped the strange encounter. But then, without warning, my car began to shake violently. The engine sputtered, and the dashboard lit up with warning lights. My heart sank. How could this be happening now? My car slowly rolled to a stop on the side of the road. I tried restarting it, but the engine refused to turn over. I was stranded. Outside, the rain continued to pour, the forest around me completely silent except for the rhythmic tapping of the raindrops on the roof of my car. I was in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service to call for help. My pulse quickened as I realized how vulnerable I was. Glancing into the rearview mirror, I froze. The man was back, standing just a few yards behind my car, motionless, watching me. My breath caught in my throat, and a wave of dread washed over me. How did he get here so fast? Had he been following me? My hands trembled as I quickly locked the doors, my eyes fixed on the figure in the mirror. He began walking slowly toward the car, his movements deliberate, almost predatory. With each step he took, my fear grew. He reached the driver's side window and, without a word, tapped on the glass. The sound echoed in the confined space of the car, sharp and intrusive. I held my breath, not daring to move. The man knocked again, harder this time, the glass vibrating under the force of his hand. I knew I couldn't just sit there, but I was paralyzed by fear, unsure of what to do. The rain intensified, the sound of it mingling with the increasingly aggressive knocks on the window. Then, as if he had decided I wasn't going to cooperate, the man started pounding on the window with both hands, the force shaking the car. Just as I felt I was on the verge of panic, headlights appeared in the distance. A large truck was coming down the road. The man noticed too. He suddenly stopped, glancing over his shoulder. Without another word or knock, he turned and quickly disappeared into the trees beside the road, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. I let out a shaky breath, relief flooding over me as the truck passed by, its lights briefly illuminating the dark road. I didn't waste any time. Shaking, I tried the ignition again, and to my surprise, the car roared to life. I didn't question it. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped away from that cursed stretch of road. As I drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man reappear, following me again. The rain continued to fall, but I barely noticed it anymore. My mind was consumed by what had just happened. Who was that man? What did he want? And why did my car break down at that exact moment? By the time I got home, I was exhausted, both mentally and physically. I parked my car and sat there for a few moments, trying to shake off the lingering fear. Even in the safety of my home, the memory of the man on the road haunted me. I could still see his pale face, his empty eyes staring back at me through the rain-soaked window. That night, I barely slept, my mind replaying the events over and over. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. How had he appeared so suddenly? Why was he out there in the middle of nowhere? And most unsettling of all, what would have happened if the truck hadn't come? Even now, I can't fully explain what I experienced that night. The encounter left a mark on me, a deep, unsettling fear that has yet to fade. Every time I think back to that man on the rainy road, a chill runs down my spine, and I can't shake the feeling that, wherever he is, he's still watching, waiting for his next victim. That's today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.